Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and I always get really excited when I see people in the public eye speaking out about their struggles with binge eating and compulsive eating. Here in the UK, we have a celebrity called Richard Osman. If you're not from the UK, he is a television presenter, he's made TV shows, he has written best-selling books, and he is a very smart, funny man. I first became aware that Richard struggled with food when he went on BBC's Desert Island Discs and spoke about it there, and I made a reel about it on Instagram at the time. This week he's done an interview on Diary of a CEO with Steven Bartlett, where he talks a bit more about his struggles with food. It's a brilliant interview and I highly recommend that you check the whole thing out. If you look up Diary of a CEO in your podcast app, or they're on YouTube as well, I'll put some links below about where you can find the full conversation. And just as a random aside, with no relevance really, Richard Osman actually lives in my hood. We're practically neighbours and I see him walking down my street sometimes. I'd love to be able to go up and talk to him, but the thing that I would want to connect with him about would be this, and that would be the most inappropriate thing to go up and try and talk to a stranger about. That said, here is a clip of him telling Steven about his relationship with food.
But it had got to such a stage, and I was so tired of this behaviour, of how weird it was and how dumb it made me feel.
What was the behaviour?
Just overeating and, binge eating and all that kind of just inability to control food in any way whatsoever. Or if I was controlling it, just being incredibly strict. So either sort of dieting or being out of control with food, which is much more common than I think we allow as a culture. I think, alcoholism and drug addiction we understand, and there's pathways to sort of getting better. But I think food addiction is the sort of last taboo.
I couldn't agree more. This problem is way more common than we realise. He also uses this word dumb, and he uses it a couple of times in the interview, that this problem made him feel dumb. He's someone who is renowned for being very intelligent. And for me, one of the things that I prided myself on was being a very strong person. I considered myself as a strong, resilient person. And so when I started struggling with food, I couldn't understand why I wasn't strong enough to just stop myself from doing this behaviour. And I just saw this parallel with Richard here, where looks like he's saying that he couldn't believe that he's not clever enough not to do this behaviour. So it made him feel like he wasn't clever. And it made me feel like I wasn't a strong person. For the longest time, I thought it was because I was weak and that I just lacked discipline. And Steven is a very good interviewer. He asks this question, which I'm so glad that he asked, because I think it's the question that most people have when they're trying to understand this problem.
Most people, I don't think, will understand when you say binge eating and overeating. I think a lot of people listening think, well, I overeat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But what I've read from what you described is a very, very different to just overeating a big meal once in a while. Can you give me some detail as to what you mean by?
Yeah, and again, look, it's shaming for me to do so, but a good example would be, I remember one of the first years, and with talking to the therapist about it, and it was sort of mid-December, so I wasn't going to see him for a few weeks, and he said, look, I hope Christmas Day is not too triggering because people eat so much on Christmas Day. The classic thing on Christmas Day, oh my God, I ate all this and I ate all the chocolates and the crisps, and we had a meal anyway, and then there's cheese at night and blah, blah, blah. And I said, honestly, I've eaten like it's Christmas Day every day from my 20s and 30s. That's how, that's what I've done. When I'm in an episode, everything is like Christmas Day. I'm not eating because I'm hungry. I'm eating because the food is there and because I need to not be sitting by myself, and thinking about whatever I need to be thinking about it. So, it's that idea. It's that sort of, it's not, oh, aren't I naughty? I had a cream cake. It's aren't I naughty? I had a cream cake, and then I had the other three, and then 20 minutes later, when there's even the tiniest amount of space, I went out and got some more food. It's that. It's an addiction. There's no other way of putting it.
Is there no other way of putting it? Binge eating disorder, compulsive eating. There are a lot of people in the intuitive eating world who really bristle at the term food addiction. And their reasons for not liking the term is that sometimes food addiction can sound like it's demonizing the food. So for me, using the term food addiction to describe my struggle wasn't helpful, because when I was going through that stage of thinking of it as a food addiction, I was going to Overeaters Anonymous, I was trying to follow an abstinence model, so I was trying to plan every bite of food, and I just kept falling into the trap of trying to restrict and then triggering off more binge eating. But Richard doesn't talk about it that way in his interview. He talks about His early trauma being at 9 years old, his father left the family and he never saw his father again for many years. And at 9 years old, what was available to him? If he was going to develop an addictive relationship with anything, food was the thing that was available. And so he talks about addiction as a way to escape pain. He doesn't demonize foods. And his approach to working on this problem has not been about cutting foods out. So whilst we might be using different language, to me, when I listen to him talk about this, it really feels like we're on the same page. And his description of every day feeling like he's eating as if it's Christmas Day, for me, I remember using a similar example, but I was talking about an all-inclusive holiday. So going on an all-inclusive holiday with friends, where there's so much food available all the time, I was finding that I wasn't eating more food than I would have at home anyway. All my friends would be kind of making noises and saying things about how full they were and how much they were eating, and I'd be there thinking, this is pretty much how I'm eating all the time. And that was the difference compared to some kind of general overeating, which he describes really nicely here, and Stephen asked a great question. Richard goes on to say in the interview how he was never thinking that there was a problem with his life. He was just thinking he had a problem with food. That fully mirrored my experience as well. I thought that my food issues was all biological. It was all because of my hormones, and it was all because certain types of foods were addictive. So therefore there was nothing to look at about my life and about myself and how I might be using food to deal with other things. Because in my mind, I lived a fairly privileged life. My life was pretty good, relatively speaking. So what on earth did I have that would make me so unhappy that I would do this behaviour that just seemed so destructive?
Where you just go, do you know what? I've got these wonderful kids, I've got this great career, and yet I'm still secretly eating and feeling deeply ashamed of myself. You know, what's that, right? And after a while you think, maybe it's not the food, maybe it's me. You know, maybe the food is a symptom of something rather than the problem.
Maybe. So Richard then talks about going on to therapy and how much therapy helped him to manage this problem. So he sees his struggle with food as a lifelong thing that he's going to have to deal with. This, I think, is what makes it even more generous and even braver and courageous of him to talk about this problem, because he's not talking about it from the other side. He is willing to share something that he still has to manage and he is still dealing with. Thank you, Richard. He talks about his steps and the work he's done in therapy. He said the first thing he needed to do was to shine a light on this problem. He said by shining a light on it and talking about it was about trying to remove the shame. And I'm always going on about trying to remove the shame. I think that is the first step for a lot of people. We can't approach a problem and get in there and try and understand it and try and manage it or resolve it if we're in this battle with ourselves about why we shouldn't have this problem and why we're so dumb, as he might have said, or weak, as I might have said, to still be having this problem. His therapist gets him to do parts work, which involves speaking to the part of him that does want to use the food in this way and building up the part of him that wants to be able to support him without using food in this way. And so he's communicating with these parts and getting these parts to communicate with one another as well to try to resolve that inner conflict. And binge eating, compulsive eating, food addiction, whatever you want to call it, I think let's not get tied up with the language here. Use whatever language you need to understand your problem and to figure out how to resolve this conflict. And if you want to know more about how to resolve the conflict, I recommend checking out this video. It's actually my favourite video I've ever done because it really speaks to developing that one skill that's more important than anything else on this journey, whether it's food addiction, whether it's binge eating disorder, whatever, is to learn how to resolve inner conflict. Thank you for watching. Go check out the whole interview and I will see you on the next video.